بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وعظيمنا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد طب القلوب ودوائها ونور الأبصار وضيائها، وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الصادقين. الحمد لله الذي جعلنا من المتمسكين بولاية سيدي ومولاي علي بن أبي طالب. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. أما بعد، يقول الله في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، واعبدوا الله ولا تشركوا به شيئا وبالوالدين إحسانا وبذي القربى واليتامى والمساكين والجار ذي القربى والجار الجنب. The first of our loud salawat in honor of Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. The second in honor of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib. Third, with your loudest voices, in honor of Imam Sahib al-Asr wal-Zaman. Respected scholars, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Our neighbours occupy a prominent position in the society in which we live. And indeed, neighbours occupy a prominent position in all communities, in the sense that a person looks for their neighbours when looking for protection and when looking for security. And indeed, the religion of Islam values the position of the neighbour within society to the extent that the religion of Islam has given many rights to one's neighbours. And therefore, the discussion of neighbours in the religion of Islam is a discussion which is both ethical as well as jurisprudential. Ethical in the sense that it allows us to understand what our responsibility is with our neighbours, and jurisprudential in allowing us to understand the legal position of somebody who is our neighbour. Because the issue of the neighbour affects each and every human being. Because we recognize that in our lifetime, each and every human being will live with a neighbour within their vicinity. Either one neighbour or two neighbours, or indeed a whole community that are known as the neighbourhood. And therefore what we find is that a neighbour in certain times is somebody who you can choose, and at other times it's a lottery how good a neighbour you get. Because if you're able to afford to choose, then of course you find many, before they buy a house, will always ask, how are the neighbours? Many of us who've gone to purchase an apartment or a house will always ask, how are the neighbours? Inquiring about those people who will be living next to us. Yet sometimes a good neighbour is a lottery, because we know very well that some people, unfortunately, in the world cannot choose which house they live in. And therefore they may live next to a neighbour who is not necessarily the best of neighbours. But we find, therefore, that the neighbour is one of the most important components in the society in which we live. Because the neighbour can either be the source of goodness and happiness, or can be the source of destruction and bad relationships. Anybody who's had a good neighbour will look for protection and security from them. And those who've had bad neighbours, unfortunately, find that it's very hard to get on with them, and that this sometimes can be the worst of relationships. That's why in many countries today you have what is known as neighbourhood watch. Neighbourhood watch is this idea that each neighbour looks out for the other. That you build within yourself a mini community. And that this community has a responsibility to keep an eye out on the needs, to keep an eye out on the affairs of the neighbours within its mini community, who is old, who is young, who is able, who is disabled, who is rich, who is poor. There is a constant need to be aware of the neighbours within the community in which we live. Recently in the UK there was a television program called Neighbours from Hell. Meaning that type of neighbour none of us would want. That type of neighbour who causes you trouble, who attacks you, who sends the police on you, who causes noise constantly, which doesn't allow you to live your life properly. And therefore this highlights to us that sometimes our neighbors may be a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And sometimes our neighbors may be a trial from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so therefore you find every religion in the world today focuses on the neighbor as an important part of our development. For example, in the book of Matthew in Christianity, chapter 22, from about verse 34 onwards, the famous line of the Prophet Jesus when he says, love thy neighbor as you love thyself. You have to love your neighbor in the way you love yourself. What do you want in yourself? You want happiness in your life. You want security in your life. You want prosperity in your life. In the same way you'd want it for your neighbor. This beautiful saying of the Prophet Jesus from the Bible highlights to us just how powerful the neighbor is in all religions. Likewise, we find Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam through a hadith of the sixth Imam, there is a narration which says, if your neighbor locks their door out of fear of you robbing them, then you are not a mu'min. Meaning that you are not a believer if your neighbor does not feel secure from you. Okay, many neighbors may lock their doors from outsiders, but if a neighbor feels their next door neighbor is someone who they cannot trust, Rasulullah said that person is not a believer. That's why Amir al-Mu'mineen in his wasiyah, which we will examine inshallah on the nights of his martyrdom, in his final will, what did he say? He said, fear Allah in relation to your neighbors. That Rasulullah recommended this so much, I thought they would have a share in our inheritance. Imagine. Fear Allah in relation to your neighbors. Rasulullah recommended this so much that I thought they would share our inheritance. Imagine how many times Rasulullah tells Amir al-Mu'mineen about the neighbor. That's when Amir al-Mu'mineen in his final wasiyah decides that out of the 10 areas he's going to discuss, one of them is the neighbor. Then you can tell just how importantly the neighbor is in Islam. Yet unfortunately, many scholars do not discuss the power and the position and the rights of the neighbor. Many times we've heard many lectures, but the neighbor is someone in society who is neglected, especially within the religion of Islam. That many of our prophets and our imams have discussed the neighbor, but many of the lectures from the pulpit have not. And that's why tonight we seek to examine the position of the neighbor in Islam in order to see how the neighbor and the society in which we live can have a very beneficial effect on our lives. In the Arabic language, the word for the neighbor is the word jar. You know how you have like a jar of jam or a jar of honey. In the Arabic language, the word for neighbor is the word jar. And this is mentioned in the Quran in 3 different places. But where it is mentioned is not in context of a neighbor, but is mentioned in the context of the root meaning of what a neighbor should be. Let me explain. The first place the word jar is mentioned in the Quran is in Surah 8 verse 48. When Shaitan tells his people that nobody will defeat you today in the battle of Badr. وَإِنِّي جَارٌ لَكُمْ لَا غَالِبٌ. There is nobody who will be victorious over you today while I am your jar. وَإِنِّي جَارٌ لَكُمْ. Because as we know, in the battle of Badr, Shaitan was disguised as a human being. The Quran tells us in Surah 8 verse 48 that when in the battle of Badr they were scared of the opposition because of how powerful the opposition were. The Quraysh and the disbelievers suddenly became frightened. Shaitan was amongst them and he was not happy about how frightened they were. So he said to them, nobody will defeat you today while I am your jar. وَإِنِّي جَارٌ لَكُمْ. Here, jar doesn't mean neighbor in the context we use it. Rather, it's the meaning of the word near. Because he is saying to the soldiers, nobody will defeat you while I am near you. Because as we know, our neighbors are near to us, true? So later on the word became neighbor. But originally the word in the Quran, jar, was a reference to somebody who was near to you. Let me give you another example in the Quran, in Surah 9, verse number 6. وَإِنْ أَحَدٌ مِّنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ اسْتَجَارَكَ فَأَجِرَهُ. When Rasulullah attacked the disbelievers because they broke the treaty of Hudaybiyah, when he attacked them, there was a group of them Allah ordered him to attack. But then there was another group of them who Allah said, وَإِنْ أَحَدٌ مِّنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ اسْتَجَارَكَ فَأَجِرَهُ. Here again, like the verse in Surah 8 verse 48, إِنِّي جَارٌ لَكُمْ. Here again the word jar is used. وَإِنْ أَحَدٌ مِّنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ اسْتَجَارَكَ فَأَجِرَهُ. If any of the polytheists asks you for asylum, then give them asylum. Now look, in the first usage of the word jar in the Quran, it was the idea of being near. In the second usage of the word jar in the Quran, it was the idea of being a sanctuary. In other words, the third place Allah was going to use the word jar in, the root meanings of the neighbor, was someone who is near to you and someone who is willing to offer you asylum. Understand? That the origin of the word jar is not neighbor. The origin is someone who is near to you, a neighbor is near to us, and somebody who will offer us sanctuary when we are not there. That's why the verse which was revealed about the neighbors in Islam was Surah 4 verse 36 of the Quran. And it divided our neighbors into two completely different groups. What does the verse say? وَاعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا وَبِذِي الْقُرْبَى وَالْيَتَامَى وَالْمَسَاكِينِ وَالْجَارِ ذِي الْقُرْبَى وَالْجَارِ الْجُنُبِ. The question here is, why does Allah talk about the neighbor in context of Sharia? As in, many people ask, what has the neighbor got to do with وَاعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا? Why does Sharia need to get involved with our neighbors? As in now, if I go on the street and I see someone who doesn't have a religion, he is still good with his neighbors. He still helps his neighbors. He still fulfills the needs of the neighbor. Why is it Allah has included the neighbor within Sharia? The reason is, Sharia doesn't deny that a non-Muslim may find it natural to look after their neighbor. But what Sharia does is that it gives you the rights and it gives you your duties to the neighbor. Sharia sets out the principles of your relation with your neighbor. You see, if I go now to a non-Muslim, I tell him, excuse me, how should you treat your neighbors? He'll reply, I'll treat my neighbors in the best way, I'll respect them and I'll honor them. Then if I ask him, what are the different types of neighbors there are, and what are their rights when you are living next to them, will he answer me? No. He'll say, I don't know what their rights are. I just know my neighbor is my next door, I have to respect him. Islam said no. Islam said there are two types of neighbors, and they both have to be respected individually for what they are worth. Look at what the Quran says. وَاعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Look, Allah first says, worship me. Do not commit shirk. Respect your parents. One by one, society is getting built. Worshipping Allah, respecting your parents. Then Allah says, respect the poor, respect the needy. Then Allah says, respect your neighbors. In other words, after someone's worship of Allah, after their parents, after the poor, after the needy, after the relatives, come your parents. Allah divided the parents into two. الجار ذي القربى والجار الجنب. The question is, what is jar ذي القربى and what is jar الجنب? There are three different opinions by the scholars. The first opinion is, الجار ذي القربى is your relatives who are your neighbors. والجار الجنب are the strangers. Because in your road, your grandmother may live at the end. In your road, your uncle may live 3 doors away. Next door to you, from both sides, are strangers. But your uncle lives 3 doors away. Jar dhil qurba is the right of your neighbor who is your relative, number one. Jar junub is the right of your neighbor who is a stranger. That's one opinion. But some of the scholars say this opinion is weak. Why? Because they say Allah has already talked about your family at the beginning of the verse. وَاعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا وَبِذِي الْقُرْبَى. Allah has already discussed the relatives. So therefore the scholars say that first opinion is weak. So what's the second opinion? The second opinion is, Jar Zil Qurba is the closest neighbor to your house. Wajjar Junub are those neighbors who are far away from you. Because you know in your house, you either have a next door neighbor, or you have somebody who lives at the end of your road. In Islam, do you know what a close neighbor is? Not your next door neighbor. The people who live 40 doors to your right, 40 doors to your left, 40 doors in front of you and 40 doors behind you. That's why in the time of Rasulullah there used to be a man by the name of Ubaidullah ibn Bakr. Ubaidullah ibn Bakr used to say, my close neighbors are not my next door neighbors. My close neighbors are those who are 40 to the right, 40 to the left, 40 in front and 40 behind. That he'd make an effort to go and say Assalamu alaikum to every one of those neighbors. Imagine, you end up saying Assalamu alaikum to 160 neighbors. But in this way, socially, everybody in the area felt comfortable with him, to the extent he spent money on them, he bought them food. Eventually the whole area said, any of our women you want to marry, you can woman. It makes you think what his reasoning was. But here what do you find? You find that the second opinion is, Jar Zil Qurba is your close neighbors. Jar Junub are those neighbors who are a bit farther away. Then there's a third opinion, which says, Jar Zil Qurba are your Muslim neighbors. Jar Junub are your non-Muslim neighbors. That in Islam, in our neighborhoods, my next door neighbor on my right hand side may be a Muslim. And then 4 doors down, my neighbor may be a Christian. Islam said, your neighbor who has a Muslim has a right over you, and your neighbor who is a Christian has a right over you. That's why Rasulullah told the companions, there are 3 types of neighbors. There is a neighbor with 3 rights over you. And there is a neighbor with 2 rights over you. And there is a neighbor with 1 right over you. So the companion said, what do you mean, Ya Rasulullah? He said, the neighbor with 3 rights over you is your Muslim neighbor, who is your relative and your neighbor. How many? 3. Muslim, relative, neighbor. Then he said the neighbor who has 2 rights over you is your Muslim neighbor, not related to you. Your Muslim neighbor. Then he said, then there is someone in society who has 1 right over you, your non-Muslim neighbor. Then he said, Man aza zimmiyan faqad azani. Whoever angers a non-Muslim has angered me. Meaning what? Meaning just because your neighbor is a Christian or a Jew or a Hindu or a Sikh or a Buddhist or an atheist does not give you a right to harm your neighbor. Because there are some Muslims, if his left hand side is a Muslim and his right hand side is a Christian, he treats the Muslim with more respect than the Christian. No. Rasulullah said, Man aza zimmiyan. What's a zimmi? A zimmi is a non-Muslim living in the Islamic state. When you have an Islamic state, non-Muslims can live there. They can worship in the Islamic state. But they have to pay a jizya. When they pay this jizya, they could do whatever they like. Rasulullah said that there is 3, your Muslim relative neighbor. Then there is 2, your Muslim neighbor. Then there is 1, your non-Muslim neighbor. That's why when Islam came and said, what are the rights of the neighbors? Islam divided the rights of the neighbors into a number of groups. 4 of them I'd like to concentrate on in particular. Number 1, not making noise. Number 2, not going into their territory. Number 3, very important, when they are attacked, you defend them. Number 4, if they need financial assistance, you give them. When you examine these 4, you'll see how this great religion opened up the whole area of the neighborhood. Let me explain. The first area is about making noise with one's neighbors. We know very well that we have sometimes children, for example.
Our neighbor goes to sleep at 10 in the evening. We know very well he wants to sleep. He has work the next day. Yet still we allow our children to play outside in the garden while their family is asleep. Sometimes, for example, we let out a loud television program. We keep the volume very high. Even though the neighbor, we can hear them, and we've all had the famous knock before. Knock on the door. Please, just put it down a little. We find, therefore, that a Muslim brings people towards Islam not from how much salah or saum, but from his akhlaq with the people around him. That's why Rasulullah said, مَلْعُونٌ مَنْ آذَى جَارَهُ. La'na is sent on the one who hurts his neighbor. I see people giving la'na to Yazid ibn Muawiyah and Ziyarat Ashura. Sometimes that la'na rebounds back on us. Why are you giving la'na on him? Have we hurt our neighbor with the noise that we make? Sometimes we talk loudly. It's 4 in the morning. The neighbor's asleep. Talk, no problem. Bring more people to the house. Let everybody come. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if he wakes up 100 times. I will make sure I continue. This is not in the etiquette of Islam. Rasulullah said, Allah mal'oonun man aada jarah. Allah withdraws His mercy from the person who hurts their neighbor. That's why I remember someone came to Rasulullah and said, Ya Rasulullah, there is a lady in the community. She fasts the whole day and she prays the whole night, but she hurts the neighbor. What's her position? Rasulullah says she will be one of the inmates of hell. But she fasts the whole day and she prays the whole night. Doesn't matter. She will be one of the inmates of hell. Why? Because that neighbor is a fellow human being. They deserve their rights. They deserve their respect. You making noise and affecting them, that is not allowed in the religion of Islam. That's why sometimes you feel sorry when you read Rasulullah's biography. Why? Because his neighbor was whom? His uncle Abu Lahab. Imagine your uncle is your neighbor. At the beginning, Rasulullah did not mind his uncle being his neighbor. Why? Because Abu Lahab, when Rasulullah was born, no uncle was happy with Rasulullah's birth like Abu Lahab. Because when your nephew is born, you don't know he's going to be a prophet, do you? All you know, he's my nephew. When the nephew hasn't made people leave your path, you love him. When Rasulullah was born, Abu Lahab frees one of his slave girls. And in Arabia, for someone like Abu Lahab to free a slave girl, because a baby is born, was seen as a very big thing. He said, I love my nephew Muhammad. I adore my nephew Muhammad. I freed her because of how much I love him. This is at the beginning. And he would continue to respect Rasulullah. That's why our brothers in Ahlul Sunnah, you know what they say? There is a hadith which says, one day in the week, Allah lightens the punishment on Abu Lahab. Because of what? Because Abu Lahab, on the day Rasulullah was born, please listen to this. On the day Rasulullah was born, Abu Lahab freed a slave. So Allah lightens his punishment. But the man who gave his whole life as an uncle of Rasulullah, he gave his land to Rasulullah. His son is married to the daughter of Rasulullah. In that same book of hadith it says he will be punished at the bottom of hell. The one who gave away a slave, no, Allah lightens one day for him. But Abu Talib, no, he's in the bottom of hell. MashaAllah. This is the intellect of the Muslims. What happens is Rasulullah, Abu Lahab was his neighbor. Do you think his uncle looked after him when Rasulullah said, I am the Prophet? His uncle and his wife, Jamil, Abu Sufyan's sister. His uncle and the wife, Jamil, do you know what they would do? تبت يدا أبي لهب وتب ما أغنى عنه ماله وما كسب سيصلى نارا ذات لهب وامرأته حمالة الحطب. His wife, the one who carries the wood fire. His wife, the one who carries the thorny plants. She used to leave the wood fire and the thorny plants outside the house of Rasulullah. So that when Rasulullah walks out in the morning, or his children walk out in the morning, they step over this area the first moment they walk out. Can you imagine how much Rasulullah had to bear with a neighbor like this? To the extent that the hadith would say, Fatima al-Zahra at a very young age, Her father was walking one day. They used to throw these thorny plants on him in his way. She would pick them up and her hand would bleed. Yet she'd pick them up to try and protect her father. His neighbor was Abu Lahab. Did Rasulullah retaliate by showing the same akhlaq? No. He remained patient. That's why somebody came to Rasulullah and said, Ya Rasulullah, my neighbor makes so much noise. What do I do? Rasulullah at the beginning said to them, be patient. Second time they came, be patient. Third time, be patient. Until on the fourth time, Rasulullah did something very unexpected. He said to the person, he said, pick up all your bags and go out on the streets and throw them. He said, what, Ya Rasulullah? He said, pick up your bags, go out on the street and throw them on the ground and stay sitting near your bags outside. Don't go home. He said, why? He said, watch. When the people would walk past, they'd see a man with his luggage outside. He said to him, why aren't you in the house? He said, because of my neighbor, he hurts me. Suddenly everybody in the community started sending la'na on the neighbor. When this person who was causing havoc for his neighbor, causing noise, when he saw everybody who walks past, says, la'na on the neighbor, la'na on the neighbor. He said, enough of these la'nas. Come back to your house, I'll never make noise again. Just come back. Rasulullah wanted to show normally we don't embarrass someone. But when they are hurting their neighbor in this way, they have to be exposed in order that the community knows how they are. That's why Luqman al-Hakim, what does he say? He has an unbelievable line of wisdom. And he is full of wisdom. He says, I have lifted the heaviest of metals. And I have lifted the heaviest of iron. But I've never bore anything as heavy as a bad neighbor. He has lifted the heaviest metal, the heaviest iron, but nothing as bad as a heavy neighbor. Nothing as heavy as a bad neighbor, meaning what? A bad neighbor can make you come home in fear, can make you wonder what's been happening. That's why I remember reading a report in Japan about a lady who phoned her neighbor 150,000 times over 8 years. She phones, the neighbor picks up, closes it. 8 years, 150,000 times. Why? Because she saw that her neighbor and her family was living very happily. She couldn't take it. I have to disturb them. Phone, close. Phone, close. 150, until the telephone company were looking at this, they eventually took her to jail because of this. Therefore, on the first level, the idea was the right of the neighbor for us not to make noise. Number one. Number two, don't go into the territory of your neighbors. Meaning what? Your house has particular gates, a particular fencing. You cannot go onto the territory of your neighbor and use what they have in their houses. Because you know, sometimes our neighbor's apple tree comes in our garden, true? Or our neighbor's tree of fruits comes in our garden. Let's not kid ourselves that we haven't taken the odd apple and gone away. Or we haven't taken the odd fruit and gone away. Some of us see this as normal. As I took the fruit, it's in there, the tree is from theirs. But that fruit becomes ghasbi. You've usurped from your neighbor, from their territory, that which is not yours. And that's why Allama Tabatabai narrates a story about how that which you take from your neighbor, which isn't yours, and is not your territory, can affect your child's concentration in salah. How? What's that got to do with that? Because one day there was a parent who came to a scholar. She said to him, one day there was a son who came to the scholar, said to him, Maulana, I can't concentrate in salah. Many of us have gone through this in our life. We find it hard to concentrate in salah. In ruku' we're thinking of business contracts. In sujood we're thinking of dinner. We're thinking of something completely different in salah. He said, Maulana, I can't concentrate. Why? Maulana at the beginning tried to give him advice. Try and read Quran before you pray. Try and read dua. Put yourself in the psychic mode of being in salah. He said, Maulana, still it doesn't work. He said, I want to ask you a question. When your mother, when she gave birth to you, do you know of anything? He said, no, I don't. When she was pregnant, he said, no, there's nothing at all. He said, okay. When he went home to his mother said, why did you go to the scholar? He said, I can't concentrate on salah. I asked him. She said, I think I might be the reason. I said, why? She said, when I was pregnant with you, you were in my womb, I wanted to go out and get some food for me to eat. It was a cold day. I couldn't go out. I saw the neighbors, their tree was slanting into our garden. So I decided to go and pick up one of the fruits from their tree. My intention was that I would eat the fruit, and then later on, to make it not ghasbi, I would go back to them and I would say to them, excuse me, I ate your fruit, what is the price I have to pay? She said, however, I forgot. And because I forgot, I was pregnant with you and feeding you food which was ghasbi. In this way, she said, I think I might be the reason you can't concentrate on salah. That's why Islam focuses on making sure that you have your territory and your neighbors have yours, have theirs. That's why Rasulullah used to say, make sure you get permission from your neighbors before you build a building on your site. Why? Because of the fact in the world today there is something called planning permission. You cannot build an extension in your house without the government approving, true? And they will write a letter to your neighborhood. And the neighborhood has to approve. Rasulullah 1,400 years ago has already discussed this. Your neighbor has their territory. They might not want light to come into their house. They might not want you to obstruct their light. So what did Rasulullah used to say? Ask for permission before you go ahead and build. Even the ulama of fiqh have a major discussion on whether you could do wudu from the tap of your neighbor. Because sometimes our neighbors have a tap outside the house. We go and we use the tap, drink some water and go. According to the ulama, it is haram for you to use your neighbor's tap to even perform wudu. Because that is part of their territory. That's why I remember Bishr al-Hafi, the famous companion of our 7th Imam. Many of you have heard his story when he converted to Islam, because when Imam said about him listening to music in his house, is this the house of a free man or a slave? Bishr al-Hafi, his daughter wanted to read a book. She wanted to read the book, but their light was not working. So she used the light of the neighbor's lamppost. She sat under the light to start reading. He came near her and he said, how dare you use the light of somebody else's territory? This is not our territory. This is their territory. Ask for permission first before you use their light. That's why it surprises me in the Bible, the story of Prophet Dawood. Because Rasulullah has a hadith where he says, do not look over your neighbors on the privacy of your Muslim brothers and sisters. In English they call it eavesdropping. When you're in your room and you look at your neighbors, what they are doing. In the West, even they don't just look at their neighbors, what they are doing. They look out for their neighbor's wife. What is she dressing? What is she doing in the garden? They look out in the night time. They see what is happening, to the extent that there is a television program called Desperate Housewives, where housewives look at what other men are doing, and men look at how the housewives are acting. No need to go further. What we find, Rasulullah has a hadith that the rights of your neighbor, don't eavesdrop on them. Don't look over your territory. That is their territory. Do not look over. In the Bible it says Prophet Dawood looked over his territory. When he was looking over his territory, he saw the wife of his general wearing a robe and not wearing anything underneath. She then took off the robe. When he saw her, he became infatuated. People ask, how do we know the Quran is not a copy of the Bible? This is one of the stories. Because the Quran would never say a prophet of God would eavesdrop on his neighbor like that. So do you know what the Bible says? He saw her, he became infatuated with her. So do you know what he did? He sent her husband to war to get her husband killed so he can marry the wife. Imagine. Whereas in Islam, the second right of your neighbor is that you don't not go into their territory. That's why Rasulullah said, whoever eavesdrop on his neighbors will be raised with the hypocrites on the day of judgment, and will be exposed in this world. Meaning what? Meaning don't think you won't be exposed. There will be a day when you will be exposed for looking over your neighbor. Number 2. The third right of your neighbor is that when they are attacked, you protect them. Because my neighbor is like my blood. They are people I am meant to protect. If I see someone scolding them, I should defend them. If I see someone attacking their house, I should be jumping to defend. If I see someone trying to steal my neighbor's house, do I just sit there and watch the thieves? Or is it my responsibility to phone and make sure somebody comes? In the UK, if you try and stop a thief from attacking your neighbor's house, you go to prison, not the thief. Why are you stopping him thieving? Whereas in Islam, when your neighbor is being attacked, it's your responsibility to defend your neighbor. I remember Ubaydullah ibn Abbas, the cousin of Imam al-Hassan, the famous cousin who joined Muawiyah's army. Before he joined Muawiyah's army, Imam had made him governor. Muawiyah sent Bisr ibn Arta'ah, one of his commanders, to go and attack Ubaydullah ibn Abbas. Bisr ibn Arta'ah had killed 30,000 Muslims when he was general of Muawiyah. How many? 30,000. When he went to attack Ubaydullah ibn Abbas, Ubaydullah ibn Abbas ran away. But he left his children with his neighbor. When he left his children with his neighbor, he said to his neighbor, please protect them. Because if Bisr ibn Arta'ah comes, he's going to want my children. That neighbor did not let him down. Because when Bisr ibn Arta'ah came, do you know what happened? When Bisr came, the man was holding the two children of Ubaydullah ibn Abbas. Bisr ibn Arta'ah said, excuse me, give me those children quickly. He said, never. He said, how dare you say never to me? Do you know who I am? I'm the general of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan. Give me the two children. He said, never. These are the children of my neighbor. And my neighbor is like my blood. I will never allow anyone to attack my blood. I'll never allow anyone to attack what belongs to my neighbor. Bisr ibn Arta'ah said, you fool. I didn't even want to attack you. I was going to let you go. I just wanted the children. He said, if you want the children, kill me. Bisr ibn Arta'ah took him and executed him. But the stand was a one of principle. That when your neighbors are being attacked, be it physically, or Imam Zain al-Abidin says even verbally, not just physically. Even verbally. If somebody is attacking your neighbor, it's your duty to defend the neighbor. Number 3. Number 4 is that when your neighbor is in need of financial help, you should stand up and help your neighbor. Because many times Rasulullah would say, when you bring fruits home to your children, hide them just in case your neighbors cannot afford those fruits. Their children may be sad when they look. Imagine Rasulullah. As in, who would have a heart like Rasulullah? Now we live in environments where the neighbors are normally of the same wealth. If you live in a rich road, everybody is normally very wealthy. But in that time, there was someone who lived in a very big house and someone who lived in a very small house. Sometimes the rich would come home with a bag of fruits, a bag of food, a bag of presents. Rasulullah told his companions, if you live in a rich place and you know next door to you can't afford, hide these things when you come home. Because I don't want the children of the neighbor to be sad when they look. That's why Sayyid Mahdi Bahr al-Ulum, may Allah bless his soul, one of the greatest scholars of Al Muhammad and a scholar who had conversed with the Imam of our time, one day became angry with his student Sayyid Jawad al-Amuli. You see, Sayyid Jawad al-Amuli was a mujtahid. He was a mujtahid. His teacher was Sayyid Mahdi Bahr al-Ulum. Sayyid Jawad narrates, one day I was sitting at home. I was just about to start eating. The door knocked. I said, who is it? They said, it's the servant of Sayyid Mahdi. He opened the door. He said, Sayyid Mahdi has given you a message. He refuses to eat food in his house tonight until you come to the house. So there must be an emergency. So he said, quickly I ran to my teacher's house. I entered. As soon as I entered, I saw my teacher sitting full of anger. I said to him, Maulana, what's wrong? He said, do you have respect for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? I said, sorry? He said, do you have respect for Allah? He said, yes, I do. He said, do you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He said, I'm wondering, Maulana, what's wrong? He said, of course I do. He said, how dare you allow your neighbor to move into your neighborhood without you going to ask about what he needs? He said, what do you mean? He said, that neighbor next door to you has been in their house for 7 days. You haven't even gone to say assalamu alaikum to them. And not only that, don't you know he went to the greengrocer recently when he moved in. But because he has moved into a new house, he's still settling in. He didn't have the money to pay for the greengrocer. He said to the greengrocer, just give me time, I'll pay you back. I've just moved in. The greengrocer did not allow it. He came home and his children had nothing to eat. And you call yourself a scholar of Al Muhammad and you're sitting at home and not saying anything to your neighbor? He said to him, if you are a Muslim and you believe that your neighbor had no right over you, your Islam would have finished there and then. He said, Maulana, what shall I do? He said, here, take all this food and go and give it to your neighbor. Sit with him, eat with him, and then take this money, put it under his rug and leave. Because that is the right of your neighbor in Islam. That if they need financial assistance, you should be the first to assist them. Therefore, on these 4 different levels we found, Islam talked about the rights of the neighbors. That's why our 4th Imam in Risalat al-Huquq, he says the right of your neighbor is that you guard them when they are present and you honor them when they are absent. You do not look for their imperfections or their faults. If you find that they have any faults, put a veil between you and their faults. If they invite you for dinner, go. If they are sick, visit them. If they die, go to their funeral. If they are in need of a loan, give them a loan. Look at all these rights which Imam talked about with the neighbor. The idea in the religion of Islam was that a neighbor was part of the spectrum of society. If you neglect their rights, you have neglected the rights of the whole society. That's why Islam did not stop there. Islam said there are neighbors in this world, but there are also neighbors you rise with on the day of judgment. There are also neighbors who you may be with in the world of barzakh. There are also neighbors you may be with in the grave. Nabi Musa one day went to someone's house. He knocked at the door. The person opened. Nabi Musa said, do you mind if I have dinner with you today? He said, by all means, enter, no problem. The person didn't know it's Nabi Musa. He just thought it's a stranger. But he said, our house is open to all strangers. Nabi Musa says, I was sitting down. I see this person sitting with me, eating. Then all of a sudden he goes. Then he comes back. Then he goes. Then he comes back. Then he goes and comes back. I said, excuse me, where are you going? He said, I'm going to my mother. I said, why? He said, my mother's in old age. I can't leave her alone like that. Nabi Musa said, do you mind if I go and meet your mother? He said, by all means. Nabi Musa came to speak with the mother, but the mother was speaking very silently, very quietly. Nabi Musa said, I can't understand what she's saying. What is she saying? He says, my mother is saying, oh my son, may Allah bless you for you welcoming strangers who you do not know into our house to feed them. Oh my son, I wish that Allah allows you to meet one of His messengers one day. Nabi Musa looked at him and he said, I am Musa, prophet of Allah. Before I came to you, I said, Ya Allah, who will be my neighbor in Jannah? And Allah said, go to this person's house. Because of his respect for his mother in old age, he will be your neighbor in Jannah. Imagine that even in Jannah, we look for a neighbor. Even when we die, when we go to the grave, why is it that a person asks to be buried next to someone who is pious? Why? Because a neighbor in your graveyard who you are buried next to who is pious can stop the punishment of the grave because of the barakah coming to them. Abu Bakr and Umar, why did they want to be buried next to Rasulullah? If Rasulullah is dead and the dead cannot help and the dead has no existence and there is no need to say as-salam to the dead, then why is it the two Khulafa wanted to be buried next to Rasulullah? Unless you don't just have a neighbor in this world, you have a neighbor when you die. That's why Maulana Yazdi narrates an incident about the importance of your neighbor when you are in the grave. He says, and mark this incident, he says about the neighbor in the grave, he says, my friend had died. He wasn't very religious. He done his salah and song, but he had a few areas he wasn't very religious in. He said, when he died, I saw him in my dream. He said, when I saw him very calm. When I saw him very calm, I said to him, why are you so calm? As in, you've died now, where are you? He said, on the first day when I died, the punishment of the grave was severe. Then he said, all of a sudden, while we were in our grave, the lady who was buried next to me at the same time, Aba Abdullah, came to visit her. And when he came to visit her, he came and he sent his salutations. And he said, stop the punishment of the grave to this lady. He said, because he said, stop the punishment of the grave to this lady, the rest of the graves around also their punishment was stopped. He said, at this moment, I said, who is the lady? He said, the wife of Ustad Haddad. Maulana said, when I woke up, straight away I looked for Ustad Haddad. He said, I went looking, I found Ustad Haddad. I said to him, Ustad, has someone passed away from your family recently? He said, yes. I said, who? He said, my wife. So when did she pass away? He said, yesterday. He said, Ustad, can I ask you, your wife, did she ever visit Imam al-Hussein? He said, never. He said, your wife, did she always talk about Imam al-Hussein? He said, never. He said, your wife, he said, why are you asking me so much about my wife? My wife. Why are you asking? She's passed away. He then told him the dream. He said, I know then why Imam al-Hussein visited her. He said, why? He said, because my wife would always recite Ziyarat Ashura. And because she'd recite Ziyarat Ashura, I'm sure that's why Aba Abdullah has come to help her when she's in the grave. Imagine that your neighbor in the grave is the same as your neighbor in this world. Someone who can be a sanctuary and a protection for you. That's why, as a conclusion, the famous Khalifa of the Boyid dynasty, when he was buried, he said, bury me near Ali ibn Abi Talib. And he said, don't just bury me near him. I want to be his neighbor when I die. That's why many want to be buried at Wadi Salam. Because they want to be in the vicinity of Muhammad and al-Muhammad. He said, bury me near him. Then he said, write on my tombstone, وَكَلْبُهُمْ بَاسِطٌ ذَرَاعَيْهِ بِالْوَصِيدِ. And their dog is outstretched. The famous verse of the dog of Ashab al-Kahf. He said, I am a dog by the grave of Ali ibn Abi Talib. I want you to write that on my tombstone. And they wrote that on his tombstone. That's why Aba Abdullah, when he died, before he passed away, he said, there are two, I want them to be buried next to me. He said, the first one, I want you to bury my son Ali al-Akbar right near me. So Imam Zain al-Abidin took the body of Ali al-Akbar in piece by piece and he placed it near Aba Abdullah. Then he told Imam Zain al-Abidin before he died, he said, I want you to bury the 6-month-old next to me as well. I want you to place his neck near my neck. Why? In the same way his neck has been struck by an arrow, my neck will be struck by an arrow as well. Then he said, place his chest near my chest. Why? Because in the same way my chest is trampled by the horses, I want his chest to rest on my chest. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us with good neighbors in this world. There is a narration, and keep this in mind. There is a narration where somebody wanted to sell his house. Before he sold his house, somebody who was buying it said, what is the price? He said, the price is 100,000 dirham. The person said, but the house is only worth 30,000 dirham. The person replied, no, it's 100. He said, no, the rest of the houses are all 30. Why is this one 100? He said, because your neighbor is Ja'far al-Sadiq. He said, that's why there is an increase in price. When Imam al-Sadiq heard this, Imam al-Sadiq said to the person, don't sell your house, I'll give you the whole of the money. Imagine to have the neighbor like Al-Muhammad. Let's pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the neighborhood of Muhammad and Al-Muhammad when we die. Allow us to be buried near their graves. Ya Allah, bless us that our neighbors are good in this world. Let us respect our neighbors, be they Muslim or non-Muslim. allow our akhlaq to shine with our neighbors in this holy month of Ramadan. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the Surah Al-Fatiha, but before it the loudest of salawat.